In World War II, Australia sent its pilots to war in aircraft that had no business being in a war. Some were trainers, some were so slow the enemy laughed before shooting them down, and some were so dangerous to fly. They killed their own pilots before the Japanese ever could. But somewhere in that chaos, Australia found aircraft so deadly, so feared, so unstoppable, that the Japanese gave them a name: Whispering Death. How did Australia go from flying coffin to that? Today, we are ranking every aircraft the Royal Australian Air Force flew in World War II, from the absolute worst to the most feared machine in the entire Pacific sky. Let's get into it. Number 8, the Brewster Buffalo. This aircraft does not deserve a long introduction. The Buffalo was supposed to be a modern fighter. It looked modern. It had an enclosed cockpit, retractable landing gear, and decent armament on paper. But against the Japanese Zero over Malaya in 1941, it was a flying coffin. RAAF pilots of 21 and 453 squadrons were the first Australians to meet the Zero in combat. What they found shattered every assumption. The Zero was faster, more agile, and climbed better. The Buffalo pilots were simply outclassed. In one engagement, a flight lieutenant recalled the sky being full of red circles, the Japanese roundel, attacking from every direction. The Buffalo was retired as fast as possible. It represents the brutal lesson Australia learned early. You cannot enter a modern air war with yesterday's aircraft. Number 7. The CA-C Wirraway. The Wirraway holds a special place in Australian aviation history, but not because it was good. It was built in Australia, which was remarkable for a country with almost no aircraft industry. It was based on an American trainer design, and it was pressed into combat roles it was never designed for, because Australia had nothing else. Over Rabaul, in January 1942, 8 Wirraways faced over 80 Japanese bombers and fighters. Within 10 minutes, the result was devastating. Aircraft shot down, pilots killed. It was one of the most courageous and tragic episodes in RAAF history. And yet, the Wirraway has one famous moment of glory. On December 12, 1942, pilot officer Jack Archer dived his Wirraway onto a Japanese fighter and shot it down. A trainer aircraft downing a combat fighter. It happened once, but it happened. The Wirraway was ultimately a symbol of Australia's desperation in the early war years, not its capability. Number 6. The PBY Catalina, the Black Cat. Now we shift to a completely different kind of aircraft. The Catalina was not a fighter. It was not fast. It could barely defend itself. But what it could do was fly forever. The Catalina flying boat gave Australia reach deep into Japanese-controlled waters when nothing else could. It conducted mining operations, search and rescue missions, and long-range reconnaissance across the vast Pacific, often flying at night with all lights off. That is where the nickname came from. The Black Cats. These crews would fly 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours over open ocean. If their engine failed, they were gone. If they were spotted by Japanese fighters, they had almost no chance. The Catalina was not glamorous, but it was essential, and the men who flew it deserved far more recognition than they ever received. Number 5. The Lockheed Hudson. The Hudson was Australia's first real strike aircraft of the war, and it arrived just in time. When Japan attacked Malaya in the early hours of December 8, 1941, it was No. 1 Squadron RAAF flying Hudsons that struck back first. They found the Japanese invasion fleet off Kota Baru and sank 2 transport ships. That was Australia's opening blow of the Pacific War, delivered by a Hudson crew in the dark. The Hudson was a converted civilian airliner turned patrol bomber. It was not designed for high-intensity combat, but it was what Australia had, and Australian crews used it to hunt Japanese shipping, conduct maritime patrols, and strike enemy positions across a massive geographic area. Reliable, adaptable, and at the right place at the right time. The Hudson punched above its weight class. Number 4, the Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk. This is where the rankings get serious. The Kitty Hawk was not the best fighter of World War II. It could not turn with a Zero. It could not out-climb a Zero. And above 15,000 feet, it struggled. But the Kitty Hawk became the undisputed backbone of the RAAF fighter force in the Pacific. and there is a very specific reason why. It could survive punishment that would destroy other fighters. It was heavily built, strongly constructed, and could dive away from any Japanese aircraft at speed. Australian pilots learned to use exactly that. Never dogfight a Zero. Stay fast, attack from above, dive away, hit and run. It carried two 500-pound bombs on ground attack missions. It flew from rough jungle airstrips that would have broken more delicate aircraft. At the Battle of Milne Bay in 1942, Kitty Hawks of 75 and 76 squadrons provided the air support that proved decisive in Australia's first land victory over Japan. The Kitty Hawk was not pretty. It was not elegant, but it was exactly what Australia needed. Tough, available, and in the right hands, lethal. Number 3. The CAC Boomerang, Australia's own fighter. In early 1942, Australia faced a crisis. Britain could not supply aircraft. America's production was committed elsewhere. Japanese forces were moving south. Darwin had been bombed. The country needed fighters, and there were none coming. So, Australia built one from scratch. The Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation took the engine and parts from the existing Wirraway, redesigned the airframe, and produced a brand new fighter in just over 3 months. It was ordered off the drawing board before a single prototype had flown. The Boomerang was not the fastest fighter of the war. It could not match a Spitfire at altitude. But it was built in Australia for Australian conditions, and it was there when nothing else was. In the ground attack and close air support role over New Guinea, the Boomerang excelled. Pilots flew it low and hard over jungle terrain, directing artillery, attacking enemy positions, and protecting Australian troops on the ground. The Boomerang represents something beyond performance statistics. It represents what a nation can achieve when its survival is on the line. Number 2. The Bristol Beaufighter Whispering Death. The Japanese gave it that name, and they earned the right to. The Beaufighter arrived in RAAF service in 1942 and immediately became the most feared strike aircraft in the Pacific theater. 4 20mm cannons, 6 machine guns, twin engines that could absorb punishment and still get you home over hundreds of miles of open ocean. Its finest moment came at the Battle of the Bismarck Sea in March 1943. 13 Beaufighters of No. 30 Squadron flew in at mast height against a Japanese convoy carrying thousands of troops. What followed was total destruction. An American B-25 pilot watching the attack described the scene. Men blown off the decks of troopships by machine gun fire. The convoy was shattered. It was one of the most decisive single engagements of the Pacific Air War. The Japanese called it whispering death because its sleeve valve engines were unusually quiet. By the time you heard it, it was already too late. Australia eventually built its own version, the DAP Beaufighter, manufactured in Melbourne. 364 were completed. It is the aircraft most closely associated with RAAF Pacific combat operations, and it earned that association completely. Number 1, the de Havilland Mosquito. Some aircraft are good, some are great, and then there is the Mosquito. Built almost entirely from wood, at a time when every other nation was building metal aircraft, the Mosquito was faster than most fighters, could carry a bomb load comparable to heavy bombers, and flew at altitudes where it was nearly impossible to catch. Top speed, over 400 miles per hour. Range, 1,500 miles. And it carried no defensive gun turrets because its designers believed it simply did not need them. It would outrun anything that tried to catch it. The RAAF used the Mosquito in the final years of the Pacific War as a fighter bomber and photo reconnaissance aircraft. In that role, it was untouchable. There is a reason pilots who flew both the Spitfire and the Mosquito often said the Mosquito was the better aircraft. It was not just a plane, it was an idea that speed and innovation could replace armor and brute force. The Mosquito was the finest aircraft Australia flew in World War II. No other aircraft comes close. From the Buffalo that got slaughtered over Malaya in 1941, to the Mosquito that flew untouchable over the Pacific in 1945. That is the story of the RAAF in 4 years of war. A country that started with trainers pressed into combat, that built its own fighter from nothing, that mastered the Kitty Hawk in the jungle, that terrified the Japanese with the Beaufighter, and that finished the war flying one of the greatest aircraft ever built. Which aircraft from this list surprised you the most? Was it the homegrown Boomerang, the silent terror of the Beaufighter, or the wooden wonder at number 1? Let me know in the comments below. If you want more breakdowns of Australian military history, the weapons, the battles, the men who fought them, hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more coming. Thanks for watching.